Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Clint Ch.19 Law 1, written by some guy named Ted. This chapter has been marked as not safe for work by the author and contains some violent themes that may disturb some. There were 14 more toasts after that first one. Over the span of a month and a half, we attacked several more supply posts, stealing everything that we could fit in Susan. We gathered weapons onto a truly impressive arsenal, several thousand guns, rockets and pallets of explosives, enough to armor thousands of fighters. The rockets and explosives were put to good use against the swarm military installations, training camps and troop garrisons. As it turns out, Vienna is an expert with explosives, knowing exactly where to place them and when to detonate them for a maximum effectiveness. With her help, we brought down the tower of the largest swarm garrison in 7 systems. That really angered the swarm. We had to make a quick getaway after that, but we had managed thanks to Susan's speed. We also attacked the slave farms, and we freed over 3,000 slaves. They all went to Aldemir to join the rebellion. Over the course of that month and a half, I saw a side of Clint Stone I had ever only seen glimpses of. I had thought he possessed leadership before, but this was entirely different. He just had an air about him and made you want to follow him. He quickly gained the respect of the rest of the bandits, showing them that he deserved to lead, not that he was just in charge by chance. He also gave some responsibilities to me. We were attacking a fortified complex with 2 objectives. One was to kill the swarm general inside, and the other was to plant charges under the base to detonate when we were clear. I led Vienna, Jua, and Corquette down into the tunnels beneath the base, and somehow managed to get them out whole. Clint said I performed well, according to Vienna, contrary to what I thought. I led another assault the next time, leading them into a supply post 100 miles away from Clint was leading an assault on the slave yard. Both were a success, and I felt a little more confident in command, even if it was just a few fighters who would have functioned fine on their own. But the missions were not the only things that happened in those 6 weeks. Our main mission was a success. We had successfully distracted the swarm enough that they moved their focus away from Aldemir, and they focused their attention in the sector that the bandits were operating out of. Not that stopped us in the slightest. Susan could outrun any of their ships, and they could not find a single trace of us, except for a large craters where the infrastructure used to be. Over that month and a half, 7 of us got to know each other pretty well. Louth was an ex-mercenary who joined the rebellion after he witnessed the death of a slave at the hands of a cruel master. Croquette was a Quantum who was the son of one of the soldiers of the Quantum army before the swarm defeated them. He joined because it was a family business at this point. Harass joined up when the girl that he was in love with ran off with a swarm officer. He was the least tragic reason to join the rebellion, but he made it seem like it was the gravest insult in the world. Vienna joined because her brother had been mistaken for a dangerous fugitive and the swarm had gunned him down without even making sure that he was the right species. Jua didn't speak much, but I got the impression that he'd been a slave, judging from the shackle scars on his wrists and how he rubbed them whenever the swarm were brought up. Clint told them that the destruction of Earth, but only after a great deal of prodding and questions from Vienna and Harris. We became friends during those 6 weeks of fighting the swarm and living the cave. We became brothers at arms, and we would have died for each other without hesitation. We trained together, fought together, laughed together. Ours was that special bond forged in combat and fire. It was us 7 against the Empire, and we felt like we were winning. But things were about to change. Upon our return from our 16th successful mission, where I led the charge into a heavily fortified swarm outpost, distracting them for Clint and Louth sneaking up from behind, I strode down Susan's ramp discussing the finer points of the attack with Harris. When you popped up, I swear he about crapped his pants. Oh God, there's another one. What do I do? What do I do? I said with my best impression of a swarm accent. It came out as a series of squeaks and squeals that sounded nothing like a swarm, but I got my point across. I waved my arms around, holding my imaginary gun. Harris nearly fell off the ramp as he was laughing so hard. Coquette jutted in. But then TEDx here unloaded on that patrol. That was the thing of beauty. I've never seen so many drop so fast. You weren't on Buria. That was the biggest bloodbath that I'd ever seen, I said. Jua was there, he can tell you. Jua was walking beside us as we carried out our gear from the armory, and he grunted in agreement. For him, that was almost a speech. I didn't know why he didn't speak, but I didn't press him. Everyone there had reasons for the things that they do, even if they didn't share them. The whole time that we had been here, the most I had heard out of his mouth at one time was an apology to Vienna for bumping into her. He never apologized to the rest of us, though. Clint walked in the door and dropped his gun and hat and designated space. Captain, Louth said, nodding his head. Louth, came the reply. You all did well today. Maybe this time we made the news. It was a running joke that the team at our exploits would never make the Swerve news. Their censorship was too strong. Our goal was to create enough of a commotion and damage to get noticed. Seeing as how the Swerve had managed to hide the existence of an entire rebellion, it was entirely unlikely. But it never hurt to try. Nah, that time with the Go Sheds, that was a bigger, and it wasn't reported then, said Harass. We'll have to do something bigger next time. What about using the CGS-43? That'll give them something to think about. Our gaze turned to the one of the large pallet of explosives in the corner. It had been a buffer space of several feet around it, to avoid any accidental contact. CGS-43 was the single most devastating non-nuclear explosive in the galaxy. A handful of the stuff could level a city block. This much could level an entire city. Clint said that he was saving it for a special occasion. Vienna appeared in the doorway. Captain, there's a ship approaching. What? Said Clint. The place was supposed to be hidden from the Swarm, and we should be safe here, but it seemed that they had found us. Clint hurriedly pulled his suit back up and was only halfway through taking it off when the rest of us quickly did the same and grabbed our weapons. We assembled in the hangar, the only place the ship could enter and leave, and we took up positions around the entrance as the rest of the cave. Our weapons strained on the doors of the ship that had just landed next to Susan. We had practiced this even if we had never expected to use it. Jua took up positions outside the tunnel, hidden behind boxes placed specifically for that purpose. Clint joined me. It doesn't look like an Empire ship, he said. I looked closely at it. There was no identifying markers anywhere on the ship. It could have been anyone. Do you think they got lost and landed here by mistake? I asked doubtfully. Clint looked at me. What do you think? I think that there is no way they landed here by accident. Clint nodded. His eyes focused on the ship doors. I did the same, watching for even the slightest movement. With a mechanical hiss, the doors opened and a single being walked out. He wasn't a Swern, that was for sure. It was difficult to tell at this distance, but he looked like a very large Uane. His single red eye visible from over here. He was also unarmed. He stood at the center of the hangar and swept his arms to the side. Is this the welcoming of an officer of the rebellion gets? Where is everyone? Clint looked over at me and I looked over at him. He shrugged and stood. You did not hail us. We assumed that you were hostiles and prepared accordingly. Vienna moved out from cover and Clint looked back at her. She slowly stepped back behind cover. Unfortunately, we have no way of knowing if you are who you say you are. Do you have proof? Clint said, looking at the Uane. I am Lieutenant Merrin Korok of the Rebellion Against the Swerve Empire, headquartered on the planet of Aldemir in the city of New Catham City. Good enough for you? Clint nodded. I guess so. What brings you to our humble abode, Lieutenant Korok? Orders, sir. I brought 50 soldiers to join your force. You can just call me Captain. New fighters, what am I supposed to do with them? Clint said. By this time, the rest of the bandits had emerged from their positions and grouped behind Clint. I stood at his right shoulder. I got a good look at this Kuruk character. He was tall, almost my height, and he even looked fit. He had a posture of a trained military man, and he had a hard glint in his eye. This man had killed before and had no qualms about it. Train them, sir. Command is impressed with your unit, and they wish to have an even larger number of soldiers like the bandits. They'll come in handy when the war starts. Kuruk motioned with his hand, and a large column of troopers marched out of the transport. They filed into a straight line, 2 deep, behind Korok, and standing at attention. Clint glanced at them. At ease, he said. They relaxed. May I speak with you for a moment, he said, looking at Kuruk. "Certainly," the Ruane replied. They wandered over to the side of the hangar where they spoke in tones too low for me to hear properly. Since I could not hear what they were discussing, I devoted my time to something else. I glanced over at the new soldiers, judging their apparent traits. Several seemed like they could be useful in addition to the bandits, but most did not look like they could fight their way out of a bar. I guess that was why they were here. I saw the rest of the bandits studying them as well. To their credit, the newcomers looked back without hesitation. Clint and Karuk finished their discussion, and they returned to the center of the hangar. "I'm told you have a fighting experience," Clint said, "training with Kraut in real combat. You must think that you're pretty tough to join the Elorian bandits. Let me tell you, you have seen nothing like what we do. Training with Kraut will feel like a nice play fight with your siblings, and live combat will be playing chess compared to what you will face with us." I saw several of the soldiers shifting in place. The lieutenant fixed them with a blazing eye as they ceased. They seemed frightened as trained soldiers get, anyway. Karuk was the kind of officer who led by threats and punishment then. I had thought he was the type in Clint. But that does not matter. We will train you to fight like the best. But in order to do that, you will need real combat experience. I am going to give it to you. Tomorrow, we will assault a swarm slave farm. If you survive, you will join the bandits. But under my command, there are 3 rules that you will follow. 1. You do not hurt the innocent. 2. We do whatever it takes to obtain victory over the swarm. 3. You obey my every order. Breaking the last 2 is forgivable if the situation is adequate, but the first one is law. If you break that one, you intentionally harm a being not trying to kill you or others. I will be your judge, jury, and executioner. I will smash your skull in with my fist. When he said that, the face went dark and grim, darker than the night and harsher than a vacuum of deep space. I saw the soldier's eyes widen at that, and I saw Karuk's eyes narrow. I did not like the look that he gave Clint. I understood." "Yes, sir," the soldiers chorused. Karuk stepped forward. "Who is an innocent in this war, sir? Do even the swarm civilians count? By your definition, they are as—" "Yes," Clint said. His voice was clipped and hard. "Even the swarm innocents. Law 1 applies to them all." Karuk nodded his head. "Very well. Do you have a room for us to place our equipment and supplies?" "Plenty," I said. "Vienna can show you where the spare rooms are." I stood by Clint as the column of soldiers marched out of sight and down the tunnel. Karuk fell into the formation behind them, sparing one last glance behind him at Clint. "I do not like him," I said. "I don't either. Tomorrow I'm placing him under your command. Watch him." "I will." "Forward!" shouted Karuk, ordering his squad forward. They ran towards the closest building, charging into heavy fire. Karuk followed from behind them. I ground my teeth in frustration. He had blatantly disregarded my order to stay put and supply cover fire while I led my squad around the side. I would see that he was made accountable for his disobedience, but first I had to make sure that we survived this battle. Karuk was not making this easy. It was a good thing that each of his soldiers were wearing an IPDM suit, or they would have been incinerated in seconds. As it was, several still fell with smoke rising from their skulls, victims of the deadly aim of the swarm sharpshooters. Jua crept up next to me and dropped one of the sharpshooters. He tumbled off the roof and landed with a hard on the ground. He didn't move. I turned to Jua. "You stay here with those 2 and cover us," I ordered, pointing to the pair of new soldiers. Jua was the only one of the original 7 that I had in my group. The rest either had Clint or were in a group under the command of Harris. "The rest of you, follow me." I leapt over the low rise that had been using as a cover and raced to the building opposite the one that Karuk had taken. I led from the front, unlike Karuk. It was a cowardly commander, the one who had to threaten his troops, who led them from the back of the charge, I thought. A true commander led from the front. If you were not willing to take the same risks as your men, what were you doing pretending to lead them? Jua had his 2 fighters silence a few swarm before they could kill any of us, and we made it to the building without a scratch. I smashed the door and went in, a gun held at the ready. I did not fire, as the building, really just a single room full of beds, was full of slaves, not swarm. The rest of my men filed in after me. I slammed the door shut as a bolt sailed towards us. It struck the door with little effect. "Out the back," I said. "We'll surprise them." I wrenched open the door and dove out, rolling as I landed on the ground. I popped up, gun blazing. I dropped 2 swarm before they even knew what hit them. Then the rest of them turned to shoot back. The rest of my squad finished them off. I peered around the corner and saw that the back was clear. I waved to Jua. He waved back and leapt over the rise, coming to join us. As soon as he was within a dozen feet, I set off down the street and marked the center of the slave farm. I could see no swarm, but I kept my gun at the ready and my head on a swivel. The rest of my squad did as well. I heard plasma fire and shooting coming from the building where Karok's squad had entered, and I waved my hand, indicating that that was our destination. The sounds of plasma grew louder the closer I got, and when I pulled open the door, I found myself looking at the backs of a dozen swarm. Wordlessly, I pulled the trigger and filled their backs with plasma. They turned in surprise at being fired upon from behind, and they were cut down by the remainder of Kirk's squad. Out of the 10 that had followed him, only 6 remained. He would have to answer for that. If he obeyed my orders, they would still be alive. As it was, I had to join Clint's group as soon as possible in the center of the farm. That was where the groups were to converge after clearing the sector. No thanks to Karok, our sector was clear. Stay together, I ordered. Watch everything. We marched down the street, eyes peeled for hostiles. I saw only one, but not before Jua and another fighter had. The swarm fell quickly. The sounds of plasma fire were absent from the rest of the farm. That meant that either all the swarm were dead or all the rebels were. As I could see Clint Stone walking towards me, his metal hand glinting with the light, I knew it was the former. Any trouble? Clint asked. Yes, as a matter of fact, I said. 4 men dead because of Kuruk's inability to follow orders. When I see him, I'm going to... Where is he? Clint asked. I told you to watch him. It's not my fault, I exclaimed. He split off from the rest of the group. I had to finish the objective first. Fine, just find him. There is no telling what. A piercing scream came out over the farm and it was silenced. Clint took off sprinting and I followed, only one fast enough to keep up. Polea curled up into a ball under her bed, hiding from the soldiers. Her shackles clicked and she froze, not wanting them to hear her. She felt tears strip down her face. She was so scared. Yesterday she had been playing with her friends in the meadow, and then a ship had come down from the sky, and soldiers had jumped out and put her and her friends in it. They had been mean and yelling and shouting. They put her heavy metal chains on her arms and legs, making her a slave. They had thrown her in here without food and left her here. Then this morning, shouting and explosions had woken her up, knocking her out of bed. When the soldiers had burst through the door and started firing through the windows, she crawled under the bed and hid from the loud noises and scary guns. Now the noise was gone and the soldiers were dead, lying on the floor. He had keys on his belt and Polea could see them. She cautiously moved her head, looking to see if anyone else was there. Seeing that the coast was clear, she slid out from under the bed and, swallowing, she reached out and grabbed the keys, trying to not touch the body. She succeeded, and she pushed a key after key into the lock, looking for the one that fit. She found it, and she pulled off the heavy locks. She stood and smoothed out her dress. Mama always said that it was good to look your best. Now that she had to get out of here and back home, she reached from the door handle, but it swung open before she could touch it. Well, what do we have here? Said the tall blue being. He was much taller than Polea, and he only had one red eye. He looked scary. But she backed up. Now, where are you going? I'm not going to hurt you. The blue being smiled when he said that, a mean smile. He walked in the door and shut it behind him, and it made a loud click. You certainly do look pretty, said the red-eyed being. She backed up more, until she hit the bed and lost her balance. She fell against the bed, bouncing. I guess she hit it. Perfect, he said, the being. You stay right there. The being fumbled with his belt. She realized with horror what that meant. She had seen one of the soldiers do it to a friend of hers on the ship. Her friend had cried the whole time. Polea jumped up and leapt for the window. She wasn't going to let that happen to her. She felt a hand close on her back of her dress, and she fell, crashing down onto the bed. She felt her dress tear, and she was lying on the bed. The being smiled, and Polydra opened her mouth to scream as loud as she could. Maybe somebody, anybody, would be able to help her. The being smacked her as she felt her jaw rattle. Do that again, witch, and I'll break your arm. She whimpered as the being climbed onto the bed. Smash! Polya opened her eyes. The door flew open and into the room and crashed against the opposite wall with a big bang, torn straight off its hinges. The being pulled himself off of her and looked over his shoulder. There, in the doorway, stood a tall pink being, taller than the blue one. Polya looked at him and saw fire in his eyes. With a single stride, the being crossed the room and grabbed the blue one by the shoulder and threw him against the wall and through the wall. The pink one had thrown the other one with such force that he'd smashed right through the wall, splintering the wood and the plaster, leaving a big hole. "Are you all right?" asked the pink stranger. The look in his eyes was very different from the one she got from the blue one's eyes. Polya knew that she could trust this one. He would keep her safe. She nodded. He smiled. "I'll be back. Don't watch this," he said as he handed her a blanket, and she covered herself with it and watched as the pink being jumped out of the hole after the one that he'd thrown. I raced after Clint, but he was faster than I was and soon fell behind. I saw him leap up the steps leading to the slave house, and I saw him smash into the door with his foot. A few seconds later, Karuk came flying out of the wall, landing in a pile surrounded by wood splinters and plaster. Clint followed not too long after. I reached Karuk at the same time Clint landed on the ground next to him. I looked at Clint and I saw a cold fury in his eyes, that terrible anger he gets when innocents are in danger. But this was even more terrible, so much colder than I thought. Karuk would die just by being in the same planet as Clint. I wondered what Karuk had done. I looked into the hole and I saw a young Banasi girl looking out from under the bed, a blanket wrapped around her body. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. I noticed the torn dress on the floor and I realized what Karuk had done. I knew that he deserved whatever Clint did to him. Karuk rolled groaning as a pile of wooden plaster. His pants were down around his ankles. Clint grabbed him by the collar and hauled him up with one hand. Karuk's head rolled and Clint smacked it across the face. "What the frick were you doing?" "What was law number 1? Clint roared, veins bulging on his neck and forehead. I had never seen him this angry. I had seen him deep in his hollow state, and that was deadly calm, and that was terrifying. This blazing fury was equally as terrifying. "Answer me!" Clint smacked Karuk again. Karuk jerked and looked up at Clint. His eyes widened further than I thought possible, and the look of terror on his face was beautiful to behold. I heard a splashing sound as I realized Karuk had just wet himself. By this time, most of the rebels had arrived, and they were standing in a semicircle 10 feet wide around Clint and I. "You are going to die," Clint said, his face still bright red and full of a terrible anger. Karuk whimpered and shook his head. "I shouldn't kill you." "Why not?" Clint roared. Karuk opened his mouth and gasped like a fish for several seconds. Clint shook him with enough force to rattle his teeth together. It was just a slave girl. The swarm did worse. Why can't..." Clint threw him to the ground. "Wrong answer," he said, with a hushed breath. Karuk knelt in the dirt, his face looking up at Clint. "You can't do this," Karuk cried. "I am a member of the rebellion, your comrade." Clint leaned in close. "You lost that right the second you thought of assaulting that girl crossed your mind." Clint drew back his fist and sent it thundering down into Karuk's skull. Because it was his fresh oven his blood fist, it did not punch straight through, but rather bounced off with a meaty thwap. Karuk fell over, a visible dent in his skull. He was still breathing, though, and with a considerable pain, if the tears streaming out of his eyes were any indication. Clint reached down and lifted Karuk up again. "Thwap! Thwap! Thwap! Crunch!" Karuk jerked. His body spasmed and blood and grey liquid leaked out of his shattered skull. Clint let the body fall. He shook his hand, flicking the blood and brains off of it. "Gather up the free slaves and the bodies of our fallen brethren and put them on the ships. He stays here," Clint said, pointing at the ruined body of Karuk. "He was a traitor and does not deserve to be remembered." He reached into the slave house and pulled out the Banasi girl. She wrapped her arms around his neck and Clint Stone walked off down the street. The rest of the rebels stared after him with a mixture of horror and respect on their faces. Not me. I followed him. End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. If you wish to support the author, there is a link to the original story, so pop over there and give him your support. If you wish to support this channel, however, there are a few ways to do so. The best and easiest would be to share this video with other people, as well as liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. All of these things tell the algorithm that this channel is at least vaguely interesting, and that may share it with other people. If you wish to support the channel in some other manner, watching my other videos would also help tremendously. Or, if you really like, there is a link down below to leave a tip or to join the Patreon. Any and all support is very much appreciated. And I hope that you all have a good one until the next time, and I'll see you then. Cheers.